Hello, Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma.
Today we are meeting in the world's biggest democracy, the fastest growing major economy in the world.
Olaf Scholz is visiting India. That's the German Chancellor. He landed in New Delhi last night and the timing is significant. For the last couple of weeks, Canada has dominated headlines with Justin Trudeau defending Khalistani terrorists, making baseless charges against India and trying to rally the West. Trudeau was hoping to isolate India with the help of his Western friends. But look how it's playing out. The German leader's visit underscores how misplaced those efforts were. Olaf Scholz has joined a growing list of world leaders who are eager to deepen their relationship with India. Unlike Trudeau, Scholz is not myopic. He wants more trade with India. He wants to deepen strategic ties. He wants India's help to tackle China and to keep the Indo-Pacific open and safe. Scholz is also seeking India's help in ending the Ukraine war.
I expressly support India advocating a lasting and just peace. And I am glad of its readiness to use its reliable relations with all parties to contribute to a political solution of the conflict.
Olaf Scholz made that statement earlier today when he met the Indian Prime Minister for talks. The German leader has come with a large delegation of ministers and executives. He is planning a significant pivot. Last week, Germany rolled out a new strategy. It is called Focus on India. The plan describes how Germany should elevate ties with India, and that is the reason why Scholz is visiting. He is here to make that pivot. A slew of agreements were signed today, covering a wide range of areas from defense to information technology, clean energy, skill development, also emerging fields like semiconductors and AI. India's Prime Minister said a new blueprint will guide this partnership.
जर्मनी की फोकस ऑन इंडिया स्ट्रेटेजी के लिए मैं चांसलर शोल्ट्ज का अभिनंदन करता हूं। इसमें विश्व के दो बड़े लोकतंत्रों के बीच पार्टनरशिप को कॉम्प्रिहेंसिव तरीके से मॉडर्नाइज और एलिवेट करने का ब्लूप्रिंट है।
So India and Germany are giving their relationship a makeover of sorts. Defense is a major area of cooperation now. Berlin is open to selling defense equipment to India. Before Scholz arrived, Germany made an announcement. It is extending a special status to India. This is supposed to expedite military purchases. It could facilitate a submarine deal. New Delhi may buy 6 German subs. They could be made here in India. Military cooperation is also expanding. Olaf Scholz will travel to Goa tomorrow to visit a German frigate and a supply ship. This German fleet is here for a joint maneuver with the Indian Navy. Militaries from both sides have been engaging in joint drills. What do you think is driving all of this? China's growing acts of aggression, particularly in the Indo-Pacific. Olaf Scholz said that India and Germany will work together and protect major maritime routes.
I am very much looking forward to welcoming the soldiers to Goa tomorrow. The Bundeswehr is also committed to ensuring that the rules-based international order is upheld in the Pacific. The freedom of maritime trade routes applies everywhere.
China is also an issue on the trade front. Germany wants to be less dependent on China. Their list of Chinese imports is quite long. It includes raw materials and a number of essential goods like chemicals, computers and solar cells, even pharmaceuticals and rare earth materials. There are some 200 products on this list where Germany cannot do without China. 200 products. Clearly, this is a problem for Berlin. It wants to reduce its dependency on China, and for this, Chancellor Scholz wants India's help. He is pushing for an EU-India free trade deal.
My government is pushing for swift progress and rapid conclusions, and I'm sure that if we work on the together on this, Prime Minister, this could happen in months rather than years.
To boost trade and business, Chancellor Schultz is making some changes. Germany will now offer more visas to Indian workers. The annual quota for Indians is being raised. Earlier it was 20,000. Now it will be 90,000, 90. So Germany will issue visas to 90,000 Indian workers every year. Evidently, Olaf Scholz is doing his bit to woo India. And it is a partnership with great potential. India and Germany, they have much to offer to each other. But both sides have struggled to achieve tangible results. Scholz's visit brings fresh momentum to these efforts. He has certainly struck the right tone. It remains to be seen where they take it from here. Look at the timing of this meeting, right after Prime Minister Modi returned from Russia. On Wednesday, he was hugging Vladimir Putin. On Friday, he was shaking hands with Olaf Scholz. How many leaders can do that? Very few, if any. So tonight, we are looking at India's position in the world. What makes it unique? How did India reach here? And how can we capitalize on it? First of all, India's position is a sweet spot. When it comes to the key players in the world, we have issues, but not conflicts. We have friends, but not alliance commitments. We have rivals, but not enemies. And that is the ultimate goal in foreign policy. Just consider the second half of this year. In June, Prime Minister Modi travelled to Italy. The West had invited him to the G7 summit. In July, he travelled to Russia, had the whole controversial hug with Putin. In August, he visited Ukraine, expressed solidarity with Zelensky in Kiev. In September, he travelled to the US, met President Biden in Wilmington, also attended the Quad summit with Japan and Australia. Then in October, he returned to Russia, this time to attend the BRICS summit. And immediately after that, he hosted the German Chancellor in New Delhi. Just look at the breadth of engagement. Hugging Putin in Moscow, then consoling Zelensky in Kiev, attending a Quad summit in the US, then striking a border deal to reset ties with China, speaking to Benjamin Netanyahu on the phone, then meeting the presidents of Palestine and Iran. Not only are these countries speaking to India, they're actively seeking India's support. This is a sweet spot that I was talking about. Everyone wants to be friends with India, everyone minus Canada and Pakistan. But India can afford to ignore Pakistan. It can also afford to openly take on China. Do you know why? Because of this positioning. Imagine if Justin Trudeau had made such accusations against another country. Had he done so, chances are the West would have closed ranks. But because it's India, it is Trudeau who's isolated, not India. All he got was a customary statement of support, no actions to back it up. Which brings us to our second question. How did India reach this position? Mainly because of three factors. Number one, the economic rise. India has the 5th largest GDP in the world. It is also the most populous country in the world, meaning it's a very lucrative market for exporters. Every country wants to trade with India. They also want to utilize India's young and skilled workforce. Another reason is hard power. India ranks 4th in the Global Firepower Index. It is also a nuclear-armed military. Would you want this country on your side or against you? I think the answer is obvious. The third reason is the focus on the Indo-Pacific. China's intentions became clear in the last decade. They wanted to rewrite the world order. So most countries started looking for alternatives, whether it's for supply chains or investments or military partnerships. Enter India, a stable democracy, a rising economy, and most importantly, a peace-loving country, which is why India is a cornerstone of Western Indo-Pacific policy. Now to the final question. How do you capitalize on this position? If you're friends with everyone, what do? A, look for gains on both sides, and B, bridge the gap between these different camps. We saw an example of that at last year's G20 summit. India lobbied to include the African Union in the group of 20. It was probably the highlight of that summit. We're also seeing examples in Ukraine and West Asia. India has offered to mediate between the two sides to end the fighting once and for all. Plus, unlike China or the US, India doesn't have a vested interest. It is a broker without bias. Like I said, this is a unique position. It's not just neutrality, it's not just strategic autonomy, it is active engagement on all sides. And India did not stumble upon this sweet spot. It was cultivated by design. Last year, Prime Minister Modi laid out his foreign policy vision. He said India would be a Vishwamitra, meaning a friend to the world. Foreign Minister Shancellor later expanded on it. He said India wanted to be a bridging power, and we are seeing that play out live now. India is a bridge between Russia and the West, between Iran and Israel, between BRICS and the G7. It is a unique position to be in, and it's important to capitalize on it, to harness the geopolitical dividend for India. Mohammad Yunus has a blank page in front of him, the chance to give Bangladesh a fresh start. But he's not reaching for a pen. He's turning back the pages. Yunus is more interested in erasing Bangladesh's past and, by extension, its identity. We saw an attempt on Wednesday. Yunus banned the student wing of Sheikh Hasina's party. Her party is called the Awami League. The student wing is the Bangladesh Chhatra League, or the BCL. The Yunus government accused them of murder, torture and rape. He used anti-terror laws to ban the BCL, and he is not done yet. There is speculation that Awami League could be next. Sheikh Hasina's party could be next to be banned. Yunus's advisors have already dropped hints.
Those who had taken part in the last 3 elections and come to parliament illegally deceive the people. And the interim government will, of course, put obstacles to their political participation. You will see how these barriers will come into effect.
To give you some background, Awami League is not just Sheikh Hasina's party, it is the Party of Liberation, the oldest political party in Bangladesh. It was founded in 1949, in Dhaka. The idea was to push back against West Pakistan's dominance, to protect the Bengali identity in the East. I'm sure you know what happened next. The Awami League led the liberation struggle. Under Sheikh Mujibur Rahman's leadership, they came to power after 1971. So the Awami League is not just a party, it is an institution, one that goes way beyond Sheikh Hasina and her family. Then why is Mohammad Yunus thinking about banning it? Because of student protesters, the same ones who toppled Hasina. They are part of a group called Anti-Discrimination Student Movement. They got the Chhatra League banned. Now they want the Awami League banned. The question is, will Mohammad Yunus give in? There's a good chance that he will. You see, Yunus is not an elected head of state. He was picked by the student protesters, meaning he owes his position to them. If they ask him to ban Awami League, how long can he resist? If he disagrees, they can always swap him out. So Yunus has boxed himself in. When he was appointed, he talked about change, about Bangladesh 2.0. But his actions suggest otherwise. He has cancelled public holidays linked to the liberation. He has banned the Chhatra League, and next he could ban the Awami League. This does not sound like progress. It sounds like revenge, like revision of history. And frankly, it's sad to see. The liberation war happened more than 5 decades ago. Most of these students did not live through it. They were born in liberated Bangladesh. Clearly, that's a factor here. They don't have the same emotions linked to Sheikh Mujib or his party, the Awami League. We saw that during the protests in August when students vandalized the statue of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. But that's a factor. It's not an excuse. For Sheikh Hasina, a ban would make things a lot worse. No party offices, no ground presence, no candidates if elections are held tomorrow. It could be a deadly blow to her. Just look at what's happening in Pakistan. Imran Khan's party, the PTI, was banned by Islamabad. Since then, he's struggled to gain momentum. As long as you have a party, you have hope. You have people fighting for you. If your party is banned, things become twice as difficult. I'm sure Sheikh Hasina knows that. She came to India nearly 2 months ago. A new report has details on her whereabouts. Apparently, Sheikh Hasina is living in the Lutyens Bungalow zone. This is a special area in New Delhi. It houses government ministers and lawmakers. New Delhi arranged this residence for her. Reports say she also takes occasional walks at the Lodi Garden, of course under intense security. Now, Hasina's stay is a problem for India, especially with the way things are going in Dhaka. A court has issued an arrest warrant for her. She's been ordered to appear by the 18th of November. Just one problem though, India doesn't seem interested in extraditing her. And chances are there will be a standoff because Bangladesh has promised a strong protest if New Delhi denies. Like I said, none of this looks like Bangladesh 2.0. It looks like a campaign of retribution. Now let's discuss India and China. It has been a significant week for the two neighbors. On Monday, India announced a deal to end the border standoff. 2 days ago, Prime Minister Modi met Xi Jinping in Russia, and today, the disengagement has finally begun. Indian and Chinese troops are pulling back from the last flashpoints. Reports say the disengagement actually began on Monday itself. It is expected to be completed by Tuesday next week. Now, this is definitely a positive development. It could pave the way for further normalization of ties. But India remains cautious. Our next report explains why.
It has been an eventful week for India-China relations. The deal on the border and the bilateral between the leaders has certainly brought the temperature down. Both sides are now making rapid strides towards normalization on the border. Reports say the troop withdrawal is now underway. Soldiers are pulling back from the last two flashpoints. That's Depsang Plains and Demchok. They were two of the most volatile areas. There, the troops were locked in an eyeball-to-eyeball standoff. Today, China confirmed the withdrawal is underway.
According to the recently agreed solution between India and China on border-related issues, the frontline armies of both sides are implementing relevant work, with smooth progress so far.
India has confirmed the pullback as well. The Indian Army's northern commander said disengagement is underway. Reports say it could be completed before the end of this month. New Delhi continues to closely monitor the border situation. The troop withdrawal couldn't have come at a better time. It's happening just before the harsh winter sets in. During winters, temperatures drop to as low as -20 degrees Celsius in Eastern Ladakh. Breathing also becomes difficult considering the high altitude. For the past 4 years, Indian soldiers have braved this difficult environment to keep the border safe. These deployments are costly for the Indian exchequer as well. The cost of keeping just one soldier on this front is at least 10 lakhs every year. That's almost $12,000. So the disengagement is welcome news. But India cannot take China's claims at face value. It must confirm any claims of a pullback with tangible evidence on the ground. India remains cautious on the economic front as well. Disengagement could lead to stronger trade and economic links with China. It could pave the way for New Delhi to resume direct flights to China. It could even start issuing visas to Chinese professionals more quickly. But India is in no hurry to reverse existing policies just yet. When it comes to China, a serious trust deficit remains. Earlier this week, Prime Minister Modi met with Xi Jinping in Russia. He personally stressed the importance of restoring trust.
Mutual trust, mutual respect और म्यूचुअल सेंसिटिविटी हमारे संबंधों का आधार बने रहना चाहिए.
So far, China appears to be keeping its commitment on the border front. But when it comes to resolving the trust issues with India, there's still a long way to go.
I understand from listening to people across the Commonwealth how the most painful aspects of our past continue to resonate.
My focus is on the forward look, not the sort of backward look.
Now let's turn our attention to Samoa. It's an island nation in the Pacific Ocean, so of course it was once subjugated by a European power. In this case, the colonizer was the UK. That is why today, Samoa is a member of the Commonwealth of Nations. It's actually the host country for this year's Commonwealth Summit, the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. The meeting is being presided over by Britain's King Charles III. Charles was having a great time over the last few days, drinking a potent Samoan brew, a drink called kava. Charles was even declared a High Chief of the Samoan archipelago. Yes, he did seem to enjoy all the empire nostalgia, but he came crashing back down to earth earlier today.
Our cohesion requires that we acknowledge where we have come from. I understand from listening to people across the Commonwealth how the most painful aspects of our past continue to resonate. It is vital, therefore, that we understand our history to guide us to make the right choices in the future.
Charles seemed to have sobered up this morning. He needed his wits about him so he could deflect from a contentious issue at this Commonwealth Summit, the issue of reparations. As you know, Britain was a pioneer back in the day, a real trailblazer when it came to slavery. Slavery had always existed in human history, but Britain, and the British monarchy in particular, transformed it into a truly global business. The UK set up a slave code for its Caribbean colonies. They enslaved people in Africa, forced them into ships, and took them to plantations in the Caribbean. Millions perished during the brutal journey. And those who survived were worked to death on the plantations. The British royal family was heavily involved in slavery. They granted monopolies to slavers, provided ships. The previous Charles, Charles II, even founded the Royal African Company, Britain's biggest slave trading institution. Now, obviously, the British royal family was not doing any of it for free. They took a hefty cut of the profits. How hefty? We can't be sure of that. They've never been forthcoming with their finances. But considering the timeline, it is entirely possible that the Buckingham Palace itself was built using slavery profits. So the current Charles may literally be living in a house of blood. Today, Charles said that we should understand history. Well, this is the history. The British royal family continues to live in luxury thanks to the millions it made in the slave trade centuries ago. That is a fact. But here's Charles trying to sidestep the issue.
None of us can change the past, but we can commit with all our hearts to learning its lessons and to finding creative ways to right inequalities that endure.
Creative ways? Are you joking? How about going the simple way instead? Just pay reparations, sell all your fancy cars, cloaks and tiaras and right the past wrongs. The British royal family will never agree to this, but sadly, neither will the British government.
I think we should be clear from the outset that the slave trade, slave practice was abhorrent. And it's very important that we start from that place. And of course, that matters hugely to many of the countries that are represented here. The question then is, where do we go from there? Now, my posture, if you like, is that we should be forward-looking. That's my posture, if you like, my focus is on the forward look, not the sort of backward look.
That was the UK's Prime Minister, Keir Starmer. He just flatly refused to pay reparations. Everyone in his cabinet is of the same view. They may offer some token, non-cash forms of justice, but no reparations, not even a formal apology. That is the British government's official stance. But there is still some hope. The Commonwealth is choosing its new Secretary General at the summit. and all the candidates have vowed to pursue reparations. Despite Britain's objections, slavery reparations will probably get mentioned in the summit's final communique. And next year, Commonwealth members from the Caribbean plan to send a delegation to the UK with an updated list of demands. There's no guarantee that any of this will change the UK's position, but it is a step in the right direction. In the United States, as the election draws closer, it's become a battle of star power. In Texas, Kamala Harris will be joined by Beyoncé. She will help the Democratic candidate get her message out in the red state. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is courting another star, podcaster Joe Rogan. He's America's biggest podcaster with millions of followers, and the Republicans aim to capitalize on that. Now, star power has long been a part of US elections, or any election for that matter, but does it really help? Do celebrity endorsements actually help sway elections? If not, why do parties call them to campaign? Our next report tells you.
On Friday, Kamala Harris will be in Texas, visiting the reddest of the red states to highlight the abortion problem in the state. But she won't be on stage alone. Backing her there will be superstar Beyoncé. The Democrats already have a list of star-studded endorsements, from Taylor Swift to Stevie Wonder, even Eminem. Beyoncé's presence will be the cherry on top of the cake. Meanwhile, Donald Trump will woo the audience of another star, Joe Rogan. His podcast, The Joe Rogan Experience, was the world's most listened to podcast in 2023. It has 17.5 million subscribers on YouTube. So, Trump aims to capitalize on that, to get Rogan's approval as election day draws closer. Celebrity endorsements like this are not new. Star power has long been a part of US presidential elections. In 1920, singer Al Jolson wrote a song exclusively to endorse Warren G. Harding. The song was called "Harding, You Are the Man for Us." Harding later became the 29th President of the United States. In 1960, American singer Frank Sinatra endorsed John F. Kennedy. He said, "Jack's got what all the rest lack." His band member Sammy Davis, however, had different thoughts. He was rooting for Richard Nixon in that race. Legendary boxer Muhammad Ali was a fan of Ronald Reagan. In 1980, he backed him in the presidential race. However, the biggest endorsement of all came in 2008. It was Oprah Winfrey for Barack Obama. This was her first political endorsement ever. Her support gave him national recognition. By some estimates, her endorsement won Obama over 1 million votes. But not all endorsements have been successful. In 2012, Clint Eastwood endorsed Mitt Romney. Romney ended up losing the race. Then there was Beyoncé and Jay-Z for Hillary Clinton in 2016. The aim was to mobilize African American voters, yet Clinton still lost the election. The most high-profile endorsement of this season came from Taylor Swift. In 2020, she backed Joe Biden. And this time too, she has rallied behind the Democratic nominee, Kamala Harris. She posted a link to vote.gov, which is a website to register for voting. The site got 405,000 visitors in a day. Does that mean Swift has helped sway the elections in the favor of the Democrats? It's hard to say. 405,000 people may have visited the site, but we don't know if they registered to vote. Also, the impact celebrity endorsements have is not often quantifiable. Yes, they do have an influence, but they're unlikely to sway voters from their key beliefs. In 2020, 89% of American adults said that they wouldn't change their vote because of a celebrity endorsement. And research backs this up. Celebrity endorsements often don't determine an election result. Hi everyone. Then what explains the flurry of star power? Well, it's to capitalize on the young voters. At least 19% of them say a celebrity can influence their decision. So the idea is to get your message across to that voter base. As politics continues to intersect with pop culture, one thing is clear. The power of fame is here to stay. In the end, it's up to voters to decide if the spotlight of stardom will guide their choices at the ballot box.
And that president is Kamala Harris.
India Inc. has a new complaint, especially the folks from FMCG companies. They say India's middle class is shrinking. I know it sounds very alarming, so let me explain. First of all, FMCG stands for fast-moving consumer goods. We're talking about things like packaged milk or daily cosmetics or beverages or food items, basically things that sell off fast and cheap, hence fast-moving. Hindustan Unilever is the biggest FMCG company in India, followed by ITC and Nestle. Most of them reported their quarterly earnings recently. The top bosses talked about a consumption rut. Look at the managing director of Nestle India. He said that India's middle class is shrinking, which is why consumer spending is stuck. Now, Nestle is pretty big in India. They have a market capitalization of $3 billion. So coming from them, it's a serious warning. And it's not just Nestle. Tata Consumer Products had a similar assessment. They said the urban market is slowing down. Colgate also highlighted what they called difficult market situations. Now, all of this raises a couple of questions. One, is it just FMCG? And two, what is the state of India's middle class? Is it really shrinking? Well, the answer to the first question is no, it's not just FMCG. India's auto sector is also struggling with sluggish demand. In September, car sales dropped again. The third straight month of falling sales. It dropped 2.5% in July, 1.8% in August, and between 1 and 2.5% in September. Remember, this is leading up to India's festival season. If sales are down now, it suggests a problem. Which brings us to the second question. Does this mean India's middle class is shrinking? Well, first of all, who constitutes the middle class? I'm afraid there is no fixed definition. Just look at this Indian think tank called Price. For them, middle class is between 1.09 lakh rupees and 6.4 lakh rupees per year. If your income is in this bracket, then you are middle class. In 2021, that included 432 million Indians. By 2031, it is projected to reach 700 million Indians. So that's nearly half of the country, middle class. But Pew Research has a different approach. They said only 66 million Indians were middle class after the pandemic, which is just about 5% of all Indians. Do you see the difference here? Your number will depend on your threshold, which is why calculating the middle class is a tough task. Instead, let's look at consumption. Are Indians spending less than before, especially urban Indians? The answer is yes. Let me quote the Finance Ministry's assessment in September. This is the Union Finance Ministry. They said, urban consumption shows some signs of weakness evident in the decline in automobile sales. So consumption is down. But do we know why? Why is it down? For starters, the backlog is over. A lot of Indians delayed their purchases during the pandemic, whether it's cars or gadgets or real estate, but now it's late 2024. Most of that pent-up demand is gone, so the spending appears muted. Secondly, cost of living concerns remain. India's central bank is wary of it. The US Federal Reserve has started cutting interest rates, but the RBI is holding off. They say we can't afford another round of inflation. If the rates are cut, loans could become cheaper, and cheaper loans equals more spending. We haven't reached that stage yet. The third reason is a change in consumption patterns. Yes, FMCG companies are struggling, but Indians are now spending elsewhere, like on concert tickets or cricket matches or travel. Plus, they're not spending as much on, say, sugary drinks or chocolates. They like healthier alternatives, which most FMCG firms do not make. At least the big multinational ones don't. So it's not time to panic yet. The government says things will pick up soon, especially once public spending kicks in. Also, the macroeconomic indicators look solid, the GDP growth and trade. The good thing is the Finance Ministry has acknowledged the sluggish demand. The next step is fixing it. Now let's turn to the war in West Asia. You know that Israel has been at war for over a year now. It started with Gaza, Israel versus Hamas. Then last month the battlefield expanded. Israel is now inside Lebanon. They have boots on the ground in southern Lebanon. They keep bombing the capital Beirut, and Hezbollah keeps firing missiles on Israeli cities. But that is not all. As we track this conflict, we often overlook the third active frontier, the one to the south, where Yemen's Huthi rebel group is waging a wider war on global shipping. The Houthis have been attacking ships sailing through the Red Sea. They began their attacks just days after the October 7th attack on Israel. The group claims that this is in support of the Palestinians in Gaza. So they too are fighting against Israel. And now a new report has come out which claims that the Houthis are getting help from Russia. The report says that Russia gave the Houthis satellite data which was used to attack ships. Apparently this information came from 3 sources, but the report does not name them. And this isn't the first time something like this has come up. Last month, there was a different report which said that Russia is keen to sell anti-ship missiles to the Houthis and that Iran was facilitating this deal. Again, this information allegedly came from unnamed sources. So that's a lot of accusations involving all major Western rivals. Before we go any further, let's take a closer look at the Houthi situation. The Houthi rebel group controls vast swathes of Yemen. It is ruling the country de facto. Even though it doesn't have international recognition, the Houthis are backed by Iran. They are part of Iran's so-called axis of resistance. The Houthis have been actively fighting Israel, but through indirect means. Barring the random drone or missile attack, the Houthis don't focus on the Israeli mainland. Instead, they target global shipping. They say that they only target ships with ties to Israel, either Israeli-owned vessels or ships that are transporting goods to Israel. But that has not always been the case. Other vessels have also been caught in the crossfire. Over the last year, the Houthis have attacked more than 100 ships. They've managed to sink 2 of them and hijack 1. This may not be the greatest win ratio, but the Houthis have been extremely successful in their primary goal, wrecking international trade. That's what they've done. Look at these numbers. In October last year, the global global freight rate for one container was about $1,300. But then the Houthis began their attacks. By January, freight rates rose to about $4,000 per container. By July, they hit $5,900. That's where they reached. That's a four-time jump, 4 times higher than last October. Ships have been avoiding the Red Sea for a year now. In August, traffic was 77% lower than it was last October. Ships are now taking longer routes to avoid Houthi attacks, and that drives up costs. These added costs eventually trickle down to ordinary people and make the cost of living crisis worse. So Western nations are furious about this. The US even formed a coalition to tackle the Houthi threat. Along with the UK, they've been bombing Houthi installations. Last week, they even unleashed the B-2 stealth bombers on the Houthis. So even though you don't hear about the Houthis often, they are still a major threat. Now back to the latest report. It says that Russia is aiding the Houthis with satellite data. It's very convenient for the Western narrative. All of their rivals just happen to be working together to the detriment of the whole world. But why would Russia risk its own trade? The report goes directly against what Russian President Vladimir Putin said yesterday.
We are very concerned about what is happening in the region, and no matter what anyone says, Russia is not interested in the conflict getting worse. Strategically, we will not gain anything from this. We will only see additional problems.
So as usual, it's the West's word against Putin's. Who you believe is up to you. But one thing is certain, the Red Sea situation continues to affect all of us. Our next story is about a rape in France. It's a story we've told you before. It's heinous, it's disturbing, it will unsettle you. But it is important to talk about it, to inform the world, to expose some myths about rape. At the center of this case is 72-year-old Gisèle Pellicot. She lived with her husband in Mazan, a town in northeast France. They were apparently a happy couple. They had grandchildren. But in 2022, 2020 rather, all of it changed. Giselle discovered a secret that rocked her life. For a decade, her husband had drugged her, raped her, and even invited other men to rape her. She was raped 92 times by 72 men. And Giselle had no clue. That's how heavily drugged she was. That's how heavily sedated she was by her husband. For years, she kept losing her hair and weight. She started forgetting days. Her husband called it hysteria. The doctor said it could be Alzheimer's. But no one knew the real reason, the horrors that she was being subjected to. This case is now in court. Her husband and 50 other men are on trial. The hearings are public. Now, usually the victim of a case like this is anonymous. They are not named. But Giselle decided to speak out because she wants to change the norm. She says it is not a rape survivor who should feel shame. It is the rapists who should be ashamed.
I wanted all women victims of rape, not just when they have been drugged. Rape exists at all levels. I want those women to say, Mrs. Pellicott did it, we can do it too. When you're raped, there is shame, and it's not for us to have shame. It's for them.
It's a difficult thing to do, to stand in court and face your rapists, to look them in the eye, to hear the details again and again. But Giselle is doing it. She wants to set an example for all rape survivors. And it's turned her into an unlikely hero in France. She says her only purpose is to show that rapists are not some strangers in the shadows. They are people we know in our daily lives. In this case, it was her husband and the men he invited.
The profile of a rapist is not someone met in a car park late at night. A rapist can also be in the family, among our friends. When I saw one of the accused on the stand last week who came into my bedroom and house without consent, this man who came to rape an unconscious 57-year-old woman. I am also a mother and grandmother. I could have been his grandmother.
In 2023, France registered 114,000 victims of sexual violence, 114,000. 25,000 were reported rape. Yet most rapes in the country go unreported. Do you know why? Because of shame. 80% women often do not press charges. 1 in 3 women globally have experienced physical or sexual violence. Yet the cases reported are far lesser. And this trial is not just about the vile acts, it's about how they are committed. Her husband doing it was bad enough. But the fact that he found 90 more men, complete strangers, to rape his wife talks about a bigger problem. The systemic nature of abuse. Pellicot's husband used chat rooms and pornographic content. He invited men who willingly participated. These men came from all walks of life, from soldiers to truck drivers, even a journalist and a nurse. Most of them were either married or in a relationship. Some of them even had children. That's what makes this story even more chilling. These men felt entitled to violate a woman. Many of them claimed they thought Giselle was a willing participant. She was lying there, heavily sedated. Yet they did not think her consent mattered. And pornography plays a role here. Police say Pellicot's husband had a laptop with multiple videos of asleep porn. Apparently it's a thing. Videos of unconscious women being assaulted. These were the acts that these rapists consumed online, and in real life it distorted the lines between fantasy and reality for them. It tells you how media feeds a culture that trivializes or erases consent altogether. None of this makes these men less guilty, but the Giselle Pellicot trial has laid bare some dangerous myths that society tells us about rape. Rape is not just a crime of strangers. It happens in private, supposedly safe spaces, in homes. Often the rapists are the people we know, partners, friends, acquaintances. As the trial continues, we don't know what justice will look like for Giselle, but this story is about more than one woman. It's about all women. It's about the culture that allows men to feel entitled to women's bodies and the systems that fail to protect us. Our last story tonight is about space. For long, the space industry was controlled by governments across the globe, but countries are now opening up. The industry is now opening up. Governments are involving more and more private players, trying to boost innovation. And India is no different. Today, India approved a capital fund for startups. It's worth 1,000 crore rupees. That's around $119 million. This fund will support 35 to 40 space startups. The idea is to help them in the initial stage to make sure that their plan is ready for takeoff. How will this fund work? Will private startups dominate the space race in the future? Our next report has the answers.
India's space program is only 62 years old. The ISRO was set up in 1962. India was a young nation state. It had pressing economic and military challenges, but that didn't stop it from dreaming big. In 1963, India launched its first rocket into space. We were no match for other world powers then. The US and then Soviet Union were far ahead of India. But in the last 6 decades, that story has changed. India has now joined the elite club. It's a key player in the space race. And now it's empowering space startups to revolutionize the sector. Today, the cabinet approved a 1,000 crore rupee venture capital fund for the space sector. It's to boost the startup ecosystem. The initial plan is to help 35 to 40 startups. Each startup will receive anything between rupees 10 to rupees 60 crore. That depends on what stage of development they are on and how it could change India's space industry. Why does India need this fund now? Because the government believes the sector lacks capital. For startups like this, capital in the initial stage can make or break their initiative. Plus, it's a time-consuming business, from designing a satellite to launching one. An initiative like this takes years. The profit only flows when the entire process is done. Usually, traditional investors are wary of funding such a sector, especially when there are no returns for a long time. So the government wants to plug in that gap, and it's crucial. Because India's space economy is worth over $8 billion, the plan is to reach $44 billion by 2033. In 2020, India opened up its space sector for private firms. Since then, there have been over 250 startups. They are allowed to build rockets. They even have access to ISRO's launching facilities. And India is not alone in this. Several countries are mixing public and private sectors in the space industry. NASA collaborates with private companies such as SpaceX, Blue Origin and Boeing. The European Space Agency works with private companies like Airbus and Arianespace. China is slowly opening up its space industry to private firms, and so is Russia. It's because space is increasingly becoming a competitive arena for geopolitical influence. Countries want to ensure that they don't fall behind in this crucial sector. Involving private companies boosts national space capabilities without putting all the responsibility on state-run organizations. So India wants to capitalize on that. Private space startups in the country are aiming for the stars. But this fund could act as a launchpad to help them shoot off.
Our joke tonight is from Canada, where Justin Trudeau is facing a lot of heat, both from abroad and at home, and looks like the pressure has finally broken him, or at least his vocabulary. Canada's parliament is currently in session. Trudeau was sparring with his opposite number, Pierre Poilievre. He wanted to say that the opposition had a broken vision for Canada, but instead of broken, he said brokenist, which of course is not a word. The opposition leader then roasted Trudeau in parliament, after which social media took it up. I know it's an honest mistake, but when you're in the middle of a domestic and international scandal, there is no mercy. Take a look.
Again, Mr. Speaker, we see the Leader of the Opposition pushing a brokenist vision of Canada that is simply not aligned with the reality.
Mr. Speaker, brokenist. It's not even a word. He's even breaking the English language. Oh, my goodness.
know that Russia must win this war. Sorry, that Ukraine must win this war against Russia. Damn! On the occasion of 90 years of diplomatic relations between Canada and China, Canada and Japan.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Rare rainfall leads to abnormal flooding in the Sahara Desert in Morocco. Cyclone Dana makes landfall in India, triggering strong winds and torrential rains. And party animals put on their best costumes for the fantasy pet masquerade. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1955, the first microwave designed for domestic use went on sale. Microwaves were born from radar systems used in the Second World War. The first microwave sold for over $1,000 in the US, making it unaffordable for most people. We're leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching. Have a great weekend.
Leo and Gustavo from Key West spent a lot of time on this, obviously. Good Baywatch people. I'm just saying. All right! Give it up for Winnie and the whole crew here. No. And please give it up for Carolyn for that wonderful rendition of this.
Kamala mentioned my name, I think, 21 times. She didn't mention the border. She didn't mention inflation. She didn't mention anything but my name over and over and over again.
The countdown to the 5th of November is on, with Kamala Harris and Donald Trump vying for the Oval Office. So, who will become America's next president? While around 240 million people will vote to pick the United States' 47th Commander-in-Chief, a relatively small number of them are likely to settle this pivotal question. A handful of the 50 states could hold the key to the White House. These are called the swing states. As the name goes, they could swing either Democrat or Republican. They're also known as battleground states or purple states. They could potentially be won by either candidate. So parties tend to spend disproportionate amount of time, resources and energy on bagging these states. One way to identify swing states is political realignment, and the other is tight margins in races. In 2020, the states that voted for current President Joe Biden, who's a Democrat, but chose former Republican President Donald Trump in 2016, have been highlighted as swing states. They are Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. These 5 states, along with North Carolina and Nevada, were won by a margin of 3 percentage points or less. Both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump's campaigns have been at full throttle to win over the voters in these states. Let's look at each swing state in the 2024 US presidential election. Arizona, also known as the Grand Canyon State. In the 2020 race, Arizona, for the first time since 1996, voted to back a Democrat. For decades, the state has been characterized as red, but Joe Biden flipped it by about 10,000 votes in 2020. The state borders Mexico, so it has been at the center of a raging immigration debate. The issue has been a top concern among voters. Though border crossings have fallen in recent months, they hit a record high in December 2023 and January 2024. But Donald Trump has repeatedly attacked Vice President Harris on the current administration's record on immigration. The former US president has also promised the largest deportation operation in US history if he's back in the White House. Apart from immigration, abortion access has also left Arizona divided. State Republicans attempted to bring back a 160-year-old near-complete ban on terminating pregnancies, but the move was foiled. Next up is Georgia, the Peach State. It's a critical battleground state for both leaders as they struggle to gain the voters' attention. In 2020, Joe Biden flipped the state, which was held by the Republicans since 1996. Biden won the state by a 0.2% margin. Though the margin was too little to call it a decisive win, it was key to Biden's path to the presidency. It was here in Georgia's Fulton County where Donald Trump was accused of election interference, landing him in one of his 4 criminal prosecutions. Trump and 18 others have been accused of conspiring to overturn the narrow defeat in the state. He, however, denies any wrongdoing. A third of Georgia's population is African American. The state has one of the country's largest proportions of black residents. Analysts say this demographic was pivotal in Joe Biden flipping the state in the last election. Moving now to Michigan, the Great Lakes state. It has picked the winning presidential candidate in the last 2 elections. Michigan had been reliably blue since 1992 after voting exclusively Republican in the 1970s and 80s. But in 2016, it turned into a major battleground after Trump won there by less than 11,000 votes. In 2020, Joe Biden swung the state back to blue with a wider margin. But currently, the state has become symbolic of countrywide anger against President Biden due to his support for Israel in its war against Gaza. During the Michigan Democratic primary contest in February, when Joe Biden was still running for a second term in office, over 100,000 voters chose uncommitted on their ballots. Kamala Harris has taken a slightly tougher stance on Israel. But whether it will be enough to change the voters' minds, well, we'll find out in November. Next is Nevada. The Silver State has been a more traditional example of a swing state. In the last 4 elections, the state voted blue. But Nevada voted Republican from the 1960s through the early 2000s. The only exception was Bill Clinton, who won the state in 1992 and again in 96. Experts say there are signs of a possible return to its Republican roots. Both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are hoping to win the state's sizable Latino population. Unemployment is also one of the major concerns here. The state has the highest unemployment rate in the US at 5.1% after California and the District of Columbia. Then there's North Carolina, the Tar Heel state of the old North State. Since 1980, it has voted Republican in every single election except 2008, choosing Barack Obama. In recent presidential contests, the victory margins have been razor thin. In 2020, the victory margin in North Carolina was just 1.3%. Poll pundits say it will be a toss-up in November. since the race is extremely tight with no clear winner. The sixth on the list of swing states is Pennsylvania. With 19 electoral votes, it's the most important swing state this November. The Keystone State clinched the presidency for Joe Biden in 2020. The big question is, can Kamala Harris keep it blue? Both sides have campaigned hard in the state. Donald Trump even survived an assassination attempt here after a bullet dodged past him and hurt his ear. Donald Trump broke the blue streak in the state with his 2016 victory. But 4 years later, in 2020, Biden secured a blue wall that also included Michigan and Wisconsin. Now, Trump is hoping to lure Pennsylvania voters back. The seventh and final one is Wisconsin, the Badger State. It also picked the winning candidate in both the 2016 and 2020 elections, but only by a margin of around 20,000 votes each time. Since 1988, Wisconsin had been a reliably blue Rust Belt state. Trump broke that streak in 2016 and turned it red. Analysts say it's states like Wisconsin where an impact could be made by third-party candidates. Among them is Green Party's Jill Stein. The Democrats have been fighting to remove her from the ballot in Wisconsin, saying that the Green Party did not comply with the state election laws. Republican candidate Donald Trump has described the state as really important. He said, and I quote, "If we win Wisconsin, we win the whole thing." The Republican National Convention was held in Milwaukee. Kamala Harris was also rallying in the same city when the Democratic Convention nominated her as their presidential candidate. In the United States, when a sitting president is up for a re-election, fewer states tend to change parties. In the past 8 US presidential elections, the 1992 election had the highest number of states that switched sides. 22 states flipped. It's often called the year of political realignment, when Democrat Bill Clinton defeated incumbent President George H. Bush. In 1992, states including Colorado, Maryland, and even California, which had voted Republican for years, chose to go blue, and then reliably stayed that way for the next decade. Can 2024 be another year of political realignment in US history? Well, we'll find out on the 5th of November.
On the 5th of November, millions of voters in the United States will cast their ballot to elect their next president. However, there's a catch. The world's oldest democracy does not hold elections which can be considered as the easiest to understand. In fact, the American voting system is quite complicated. Now, most democracies in the world follow something that's called the popular vote, where voters directly cast their ballots to a political party or leader. It's a direct transfer of the vote from the voter to whoever is on the ballot. But the United States does not follow this. In fact, it's the only democracy in the world that has an indirect voting system called the Electoral College. Simply put, the Electoral College is a process of voting. It's not really a college. It was established in 1787 AD and was included in the US Constitution by the Founding Fathers. The Electoral College is basically the selection of electors who are called delegates. On the 5th of November, when Americans will queue up to vote, they won't actually be voting for their next president. Instead, they'll actually be voting for delegates who represent their respective states, and these delegates will then vote for the president. So, how does the Electoral College work? The Electoral College is made up of 538 delegates. You must be wondering where the number 538 comes from. It's the number of senators and representatives from each of the 50 states. The breakdown of 538 includes exactly 100 senators, 2 from each state, and 438 representatives from the 50 states. each state's number of representatives is based on its population. Let's take a closer look with an example. California and Texas are the two most populous states, and so they have a higher number of representatives. However, regardless of the population of the states, each of them gets 3 votes to start with. The remaining are then added depending on the population of the state. However, that does not mean that the states with a higher population enjoy more voting rights. In fact, it can be quite the opposite. Let's take the example of 2 states. The population of Texas is over 29 million. On the other hand, Alaska has a much smaller population of just above 700,000. However, each representative from Texas and Alaska roughly represents the same proportion of the population. So, as Texas gets 38 representatives in the US Congress, Alaska gets 3. And this makes voting different in Texas and Alaska, because each of the 38 delegates from Texas now represent roughly over 760,000 people. Meanwhile, each delegate from Alaska represents over 250,000 people. Basically, it takes 760,000 people from Texas to get 1 vote, but it just takes 250,000 people from Alaska to get that same 1 vote. So the vote in Alaska can be considered a lot more influential. When Americans go to polls in November, they aren't exactly voting for the president directly, but their state's representatives, whether that's Democrat or Republican. And then these delegates give their votes to the presidential candidate from their party. Whichever candidate then wins the majority in a state, no matter how big or small it may be, wins all the electoral votes of that state. And in total, to win the race to the Oval Office, a candidate must win 270 and more votes across 50 states. So when Americans say this,
I love her. I am so glad to see a presidential nominee who is youthful and joyful, and I think that reflects right back onto the Democrats. My first time voting in a presidential election, and I could not be happier.
I don't know the exact numbers, but I know the last election, I think Trump got like 88 or 90% of the vote here. I think he's going to get that again.
The courts will take care of that. Let's take care of him in November.
What they really mean is that they will vote for the delegates who represent their political party. And then, those delegates will vote for the presidential candidate from their respective parties.
Kamala, you are fired! You're fired! Get out! Get out!
It's time to turn the page.
However, the delegates don't have to necessarily vote for the candidate that the population wants to give its vote to. In fact, electors are free to vote against the wishes of the people. And this is despite having been elected as a delegate by the voters. So, with how complex the electoral system is, should the US continue with it, or adapt the much simpler popular voting system? A survey from 2023 shows that a majority of Americans want to do away with the Electoral College. A Pew Research study shows that nearly 2/3 of US citizens want popular voting. Americans say that it would truly reflect the mood of the nation for who should sit in the Oval Office. That's because a presidential candidate could win the popular vote, which means that more people voted for them, but they could lose the presidential race due to the Electoral College, where the victor is decided by the number of delegates and not the votes of the people. The Pew study has some more insights on the issue. It says that Democrats are far more likely than Republicans to support moving to the popular vote. On aggregate, over 80% of Democrats say that they would like to have the popular voting system in America. In contrast, about 45% of Republicans share the same sentiments. Moving away from party ideologies and towards demographies, almost 70% of Americans under the age of 50 prefer the popular vote. On the other hand, Americans who are 65 and older want the Electoral College to continue.
A very nice call from Kamala.
The current system allows a candidate to lose the popular vote but still win the Electoral College. This occurred both in the 2000 and the 2016 elections, which were won by George W. Bush and Donald Trump, respectively. However, the only way to change the Electoral College would be through a constitutional amendment. But amending the Constitution is a Herculean task. The last time it was done was in the year 1992, and it was about raising salaries for congressional lawmakers. So, for now, it looks like Americans will have to keep voting using the Electoral College to elect their president.
As borders are, Kamala threw open our borders and allowed 20 million illegal aliens to stampede into our country from all over the world.
Every U.S. citizen has the right to vote. And this year, every eligible voter's ballot will decide who will be the next U.S. president. The 2024 race for the White House will see over 200 million Americans cast their vote.
I accept your nomination to be President of the United States of America.
However, there are over 350 million people living in the United States. So why isn't the number of eligible voters higher? And is voting restricted only to American citizens? Voting is a fundamental and guaranteed right to citizens of the United States. Only they are allowed to cast their ballot to be eligible. Here's what the requirements are. A person has to be a U.S. citizen. This could be through birth in the U.S., through birth overseas to parents who are U.S. citizens. Then there is the process of naturalization. It is the process of voluntarily becoming a U.S. citizen, and then you also have to be 18 years and older on voting day. If you meet these requirements, then you may register to become a voter and cast your ballot in the U.S. elections. So U.S. citizens can cast their vote and pick their next president. They can also pick their governors and mayors by voting in the state and local elections. But what about those who are not U.S. citizens but are living in the country? This includes people who are in America on work visas or those who have acquired lawful permanent resident status, also known as green cards. But what about the 50 million international tourists and the 1 million plus international students? And millions of illegal migrants? Can these people also cast their vote? Here's what the rules say. Lawful permanent residents or green card holders cannot vote in the federal elections. This includes the presidential, Senate and House of Representatives races. Additionally, green card holders also cannot vote in state elections. That's because most U.S. states follow federal law. However, green card holders can exercise their voting rights in certain towns and cities where local law allows them to vote. States like Maryland and Vermont allow green card holders to vote. However, U.S. federal law allows green card holders to participate in other political activity. This can include volunteering in political campaigns or advocating for social issues. And what about the others? Well, apart from green card holders, international tourists, students, people on work visas or illegal migrants cannot cast their ballot in either the federal, state, or local elections. However, they can take part in political events and campaigns, but only as volunteers. This brings us to the question, why is citizenship and voting a raging debate in the United States? It all started in February, when Tesla CEO and tech billionaire Elon Musk sparked a debate on his social media platform X. He questioned U.S. President Joe Biden's migration policy. Musk said that Biden purposely had weak borders so that millions of illegal migrants could enter the U.S. Musk added that the Biden administration would fast-track citizenship for those migrants and create a permanent majority, a one-party state. The billionaire said that this was the strategy of the Democrats to ensure that they win the 2024 presidential race. Musk's tweet was not taken seriously at the time, but that all changed in June, when Joe Biden announced that he would give citizenship to 500,000 people who are undocumented spouses of Americans but have been living in the United States for over 10 years and more.
Today I'm announcing a common sense fix to streamline the process for for obtaining legal status for immigrants.
And that's when the Republicans jumped on the matter. At least 16 Republican states are suing the Biden administration for this move. Elon Musk says the Democrats are importing voters. The Republican-led states argue that Biden has bypassed congressional laws to fast-track citizenship for blatant political purposes. However, the Democrats have hit back. Vice President Kamala Harris has called it Republican strategy to tear apart families. Harris has accused the Republicans of hindering the process of legalizing the migrant status of millions.
Donald Trump believes a border deal would hurt his campaign. So he ordered his allies in Congress to kill the deal. Well, I refuse to play politics with our security, and here is my pledge to you. As president, I will bring back the bipartisan border security bill that he killed, and I will sign it into law.
This brings us to the question, how easy is it to get voting rights as a migrant? And will Biden's citizenship policy benefit the Democrats? Joe Biden's citizenship eligibility program for spouses has crucial details about becoming a citizen. The program allows undocumented spouses of Americans who have lived in the U.S. for at least 10 years or more as of June 17, 2024. To apply for citizenship, they should have no criminal history and will have to provide extensive documentation of taxes and their marital status. Once the application is approved, the qualifying applicant will have 3 years to obtain a green card or risk deportation. And after getting a green card, they can apply for naturalization or full U.S. citizenship. This means that the almost 500,000 spouses of Americans will not be eligible to vote in this year's election. However, the Democrats are being criticized for pulling this move in an election year, which is in stark contrast to Donald Trump's proposal of mass deportations.
We will do large deportations.
Additionally, the path to U.S. citizenship takes roughly a decade. So the influx of immigrants during Biden's tenure will also not have a direct impact in this year's election. However, it will steer how Americans will vote this year, with border security remaining one of the top concerns. Meanwhile, both Elon Musk and Donald Trump continue to claim that the Democrats are signing up illegal migrants onto voter lists, even though they have not come forward with any evidence for their claims. Additionally, there is not enough research on whether migrants who get U.S. citizenship prefer to vote for Democrats or Republicans. So the fact still remains, despite these wild claims, that only American citizens choose their president.
On the 5th of November 2024, millions across all 50 states in the United States will vote to pick their next president. In the U.S., the winner is not the candidate who gets the most votes across the country, which is the popular vote. Instead, both candidates compete to win contests across the 50 states. But over years, electorates in some of these states have been good reflectors of the voting behavior of the entire country. These states are called the bellwether states. They tend to reliably match the countrywide outcome of the presidential election. So, candidates favored in the bellwether states mostly end up winning the election.
We want Kamala, yes we do!
These states are Ohio, Nevada, New Mexico, Florida, Colorado, New Hampshire, and Pennsylvania. Let's begin with Ohio, the Buckeye State. It has historically been a bellwether state and continues to hold on to that status. The candidate who wins Ohio usually has a very good chance of spending the next 4 years in the Oval Office. The state holds the highest bellwether percentage at 90.9%. It has held that status for 14 presidential election cycles, across 60 years, from Lyndon Johnson's landslide win in 1964 to Donald Trump's victory in 2016. Ohio's choice won the Electoral College in every election. It held the longest streak of a bellwether state, until 2020, when the Buckeye State recorded its first miss. It gave a majority of its vote to then-incumbent President Donald Trump. The former president had an 8-point margin of victory in the state. But Trump still lost to Joe Biden in the National Vote and Electoral College. Next is Nevada, the Silver State, and the only other state of all the bellwether states to compete with Ohio's record. Nevada shares the bellwether percentage with Ohio at 90.9%. Since 1976, Democratic and Republican candidates have won Nevada 6 times each, and the winner in Nevada has gone to the White House in 10 of the last 12 elections. But just like Ohio, Nevada too has had one miss since 1980. In 2016, Hillary Clinton won the state over Donald Trump, who won the presidential election.
Instead of taking charge that night, Hillary Clinton decided to go home and sleep. Incredible.
In 2020, the state was back to its winning ways, when Joe Biden carried the state. The state has just 6 electoral votes, but no presidential candidate ever been able to take the Silver State for granted, because it's also a swing state. The third is New Mexico. It has a bellwether percentage of 81.8%. Since the 1980s, it has only gone wrong twice in calling the election. In the year 2000, the state sided with Al Gore over George W. Bush, with a vote margin of just 366 votes.
I'm sure there's some people in this state that say, I don't like George W. because who his dad is. Very few are saying they don't like George W. because who my mother is, by the way.
In the year 2016, Hillary Clinton carried the state, while Donald Trump won the presidency. If we consider statistics from the year 1912, which is when New Mexico became a state, then the number of misfires for New Mexico goes up to 3. In 1976, New Mexico picked the incumbent Gerald Ford, but Democrat Jimmy Carter won the presidency. Fourth bellwether state is Florida. The Sunshine State also has an impressive record. With an overall bellwether percentage of 81.8%, Florida has only gotten it wrong twice since 1980. Once in 1992, when it voted for incumbent George H. Bush, and Bill Clinton won the presidency.
I, William Jefferson Clinton, do solemnly that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
And in 2020, when the state voted red backing Donald Trump, but Democrat Joe Biden swept the presidential election. Next is Colorado. The Centennial State is also high on the list of bellwether states. Colorado's bellwether percentage stands at 81.8%. This state too has had 2 misfires in the last 43 years. Like Florida, Colorado too backed George H. Bush in 1992, and the state voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016, but Donald Trump pulled off a massive upset. Sixth is New Hampshire. The Granite State shares its bellwether percentage with Colorado at 81.8%. The 2 misses on its record are from the year 2004 and 2016, when incumbent President George W. Bush won a second term in office, but New Hampshire picked Democrat John Kerry. And in 2016, when the state threw its weight behind Hillary Clinton.
Thank you so much!
The 7th and last on the list is Pennsylvania, the Keystone State. It also a bellwether percentage of 81.8%, but the state had back-to-back failures in the year 2000 and 2004. It rejected George W. Bush in 2 consecutive presidential elections, voting for Al Gore in the year 2000 and John Kerry in 2004. Pennsylvania chose blue, but Bush left it red-faced. With 19 electoral votes, Pennsylvania is also a swing state. The United States also has 19 bellwether counties across 50 states. From 1980 to 2016, these 19 counties have voted for the winner of the presidential election, every single time. In fact, Valencia County in New Mexico has had the most impressive feat. It has been voting for the winner since 1952. But the 2020 presidential election was a blot on their record. 18 out of the 19 bellwether counties got it wrong that year. They voted for former President Donald Trump. They backed him not marginally but in huge numbers. But Joe Biden won the presidency. The only one whose record was intact was Clallam County in Washington, that voted for Biden. So which way will these counties and states go this November? Will they help Donald Trump return to the Oval Office?
From the day I take the oath of office,
Or will they ensure Kamala Harris scripts history by becoming the first female president of the United States?
It was the same old show. Same old tired playbook we've heard for years.
On November 5th, as voting gets underway in America,
A quick reminder. Vote.
all eyes will be on these 7 bellwether states and the 19 counties to indicate which way the wind is blowing.
On November 5th, all eyes will be on America. The country will head to the ballot box, and they have a choice to make: Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump. Who will the United States choose?
I accept your nomination to be President of the United States of America.
I am running to be president for all of America, not half of America.
Now, no one can predict the election results. We will only know when it's declared. But behind the votes, there's another story. A story of numbers, statistics, and predictions. The story of polls. We hear about them during every presidential election. In some states, Donald Trump is leading. In the others, it's Kamala Harris. These polls are crucial to each election. They shape narratives. They influence campaigns. And sometimes, they even leave the entire nation baffled. In 2016 and 2020, the polls got it wrong. Can they get it right this time? And what do these opinion polls mean for the American democracy? The year was 1948. The date was November 3rd. This was the front page of the Chicago Daily Tribune. It read, "Dewey defeats Truman." But here's the catch. Thomas E. Dewey did not win that election. Harry S. Truman did. So, why did the paper print that headline? A year before the elections, the Chicago Daily Tribune had changed the way it printed its paper. So, the copy needed to go to print earlier. That was the case, too, on that night. Most states had not declared their results, but the paper took a leap of faith. After all, every poll said that Dewey would win. So, they went ahead with this copy. It went to press. But by next morning, it was a completely different result. The polls predicted a Dewey win. Instead, it was a Truman triumph. He even posed with the Chicago Daily Tribune copy. Now, polling has been a part of American elections for over a century. It started with simple straw polls. As technology advanced, so did the methods. Now, they are complex statistical analyses. So, how do the polls work? It's all about 3 things: data, sampling, and the art of asking the right questions. At its core, a poll is a survey. It's a way to measure the opinions of a specific group, but in a country as large and diverse as the United States, it's impossible to ask everyone. So, pollsters rely on sampling. Age, gender, race, location. These are all factors that are considered before building a sample. Then, there are the methods. How do you contact the sample group? Pollsters use landlines, cell phones, and online surveys. Each method has its advantages and drawbacks. More importantly, each one can influence the outcome of the poll. For example, imagine it's an online survey. Chances are the answers will come from a younger generation. Also, chances are they will be more educated. So, pollsters must keep that in mind. Once the data is collected, it's analyzed. It is then adjusted for various factors like non-response bias, which occurs when survey participants either can't or won't respond to a survey question. Finally, it is presented to the public as the polls that we see. So it's a science, but one with inherent uncertainties. Take 1980, for example. Jimmy Carter versus Ronald Reagan. Polls predicted a close race. However, Reagan won by a landslide So, why did the polls go wrong? It's the voter sentiment in the end. Reagan performed well in the presidential debate that was held a week before the election. It convinced many undecided voters. They ended up voting for him, and the polls completely missed this. Then there's 2000, George W. Bush versus Al Gore. Many polls predicted an Al Gore win. Now, while Gore did win the popular vote, the outcome depended on the Electoral College. Polls underestimated that. It did not take into consideration the razor-thin margins in key states. So it was a blot on the reputation of polls. But 2016 really changed the game. It's when America woke up to how wrong these polls could be. Polls predicted an overwhelming victory for Hillary Clinton. Yet on election night, Donald Trump emerged as the 45th president of the United States. So what went wrong? Well, there are several factors at play. The first was the underestimation of Trump's support in key battleground states. Pollsters missed crucial pockets of voters. That's the rural, white working class. They turned out in larger numbers than expected. The second was education levels. Non-educated voters weren't well represented in the samples, and they turned out to be pivotal in Trump's victory. The third was late deciding voters, those who swung towards Trump in the final days of the campaign. Polls didn't capture this last-minute shift. But here was the biggest issue: the failure to account for this shy Trump voter. These voters supported Trump, but were reluctant to declare it. Hillary may have lost the election, but the biggest loser of 2016 were the pollsters. So 4 years later, the polling industry vowed to learn from its mistakes. In 2020, the polls once again predicted a clear winner. It was Joe Biden. This time, the prediction was correct, but there was an issue. The margin was far narrower than expected. Despite making adjustments, pollsters underestimated Trump's support again. The problems were the same as 2016. So, what will it be in 2024? Pollsters are now looking at new technologies: AI, big data, and social media analytics. They want to use it to improve accuracy. But will it be enough? Will pollsters get it right this time? Or will they be wrong for the third time? Whatever the answer is, one thing is clear: polls will remain a critical part of the presidential elections, but they are not infallible. And in the end, it's the people, not the polls, who ultimately decide who will be in the White House.
If there's one thing the year 2024 will be remembered for, it'll be elections. From India to Britain, the European Union to South Korea, South Africa, Finland, France, Taiwan, and even Russia. Over 60 nations held elections this year. However, it's not over yet. One last global election remains, and it's just around the corner. The United States, the world's oldest modern democracy, is set to vote this November. Americans will be choosing their 47th president. And running for the White House are former President Donald Trump and current Vice President Kamala Harris. The presidential race in the U.S. happens every 4 years. However, there is something constant in each election that has remained unchanged for over 175 years, and that is the day of the week when the elections are held: Tuesday. This year as well, Americans will be voting on November 5th, which is also a Tuesday. So why is Tuesday connected to America's democracy? Well, it's a bit of coincidence and tradition. The election day in the United States has been set in stone by federal law. The U.S. law calls for a presidential poll to be held on the Tuesday after the first Monday in November. But how did the November Tuesday become so important for U.S. democracy? Let's find out. The U.S. Constitution does not designate a specific day for holding elections. However, it allows Congress to select the time and day for choosing electors or delegates. These delegates, in turn, vote to elect the president and vice president. The Constitution also gives some rights to the states to choose the times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives. However, it also permits Congress to make or alter those state rules. So if the day hasn't been fixed, then how did Tuesday come into the picture? The US declared itself independent from Britain in 1776. The United States ratified its constitution in 1788. This was followed by the first elections that were held between November of 1788 and June 1789. Yes, voting that is now done within one day took up to 6 months when it first began. And subsequent elections continued to be chaotic. Things changed more than 5 decades later when the 1840 presidential election saw widespread voting fraud. In response, then Representative Alexander Duncan proposed a uniform election day for both presidential and House elections in 1844. The bill initially sought to require all states to hold their elections on a single day. That is on Tuesday after the first Monday in November. While the House passed the bill, the Senate didn't table it before the 1844 election. Alexander Duncan reintroduced the bill in the next session, this time focusing solely on the presidential election. Various amendments were proposed during the bill's consideration. Ultimately, the House adopted the bill, and the Senate passed it with minor corrections. The bill was signed into law on January 23, 1845, by President John Tyler, making Tuesday the official day for Americans to vote for their president. But the mystery remains: why choose a Tuesday? Historians say the answer lies in 19th century American lifestyle. The choice of Tuesday in November is deeply rooted on the country's agrarian culture of the time. November was ideal because it followed the completion of the harvest season. The month also avoided conflicts with both planting in the spring and early fall. This meant that farmers could plant their crop and travel to vote, which would take days in those times. Additionally, Tuesday was chosen due to religious reasons. In Christian practice, the term Sabbath is often used to refer to Sunday. It recognizes the day of Jesus Christ's resurrection, and many Christians would observe a weekly day of rest and worship on Sunday. In the 19th century, polling stations were quite far from rural areas, and for voters, particularly farmers, it meant at least a day-long journey. So to avoid forcing people to travel on the holy day of Sabbath, Monday was not considered, and Wednesday, which was designated as the market day for farmers, was also rejected. Naturally, Tuesday emerged as the prime choice and eventually became the official day. However, Tuesday as an election day has had its fair share of opposition. Modern-day political experts say that voting on a weekend would see an increase in turnout. They argue that holding election on a Tuesday hinders voter access due to work commitments. One of the organizations leading the cause to reassign voting day is called Why Tuesday? Founded in 2005, the group raises awareness about America's low voter turnout. It aims to highlight the lack of accessible voting options, and they are leading the fight to move election day to the weekend. Many countries hold elections on weekends. Australia, Germany, France, and Japan generally conduct elections on Saturdays or Sundays. Brazil votes on the first Sunday of October, with runoffs on the last Sunday if needed. Meanwhile, Mexico shifted from the first Sunday of July to the first Sunday of June from 2021. The European Union also typically holds its parliament election on a weekend. However, in the Anglosphere, such as the United States, United Kingdom, and Canada, elections are typically held on weekdays. It is influenced by historical Christian practice of observing Sabbath. Meanwhile, in India, elections occur over multiple days with different phases for various constituencies. In the case of the United States, it's worth noting that while federal elections are on a Tuesday, state and local elections have more flexibility. However, many states align their elections with the federal date simply for convenience. On November 5th, the Tuesday after the first Monday of November, millions of Americans will line up at polling booths. They will exercise their fundamental right of self-governance. As for the Tuesday election day, the law that has continued for over 175 years faces little opposition and will likely remain for many more years to come.
make sure he does face a consequence, and that